Hi students, today I am going to start the new section of literature, that is American literature. We all know that American literature is also one of the very core subjects areas where we have to bank even if you have to qualify any examination. There are so many areas in American literature, so many authors, plays, dramas, poetry, novels, which are even asked in the top level examinations, UGC NET as well as PGT and other examinations as well. So this lecture will not only give you a competitive level, but also for the MA English students and even for the IGNOU students who are also opting for MA English exams. So now students, let us concentrate on this lecture, History of American Literature. Always remember that whenever we start with any new literatures, we have to know something in detail about the history part. Why? Because unless and until you will not understand the background, the history of that area of that literature, we will not be able to follow their authors, their works and the other details. Fine? So now let us start. See students, the history of American literature started with the settlement of Jamestown. And this Jamestown got settled somewhere in 1607. And true ballet letters means the literature or the literature, the things which were written are of actually valuable. They are things, they are written for reading and they have some kind of value in it. So that is in term called true ballet letters. So this true ballet letters, or you can say good literature, came to be written in America by the close of the 18th century. And suppose if recording of the human experiences can be termed as literature, what the early colonists have written must be deemed as an integral part of literature. इसका मतलब क्या होता है स्टूडेंट्स कि अगर हम ये कहें कि हमने जो कुछ भी लिखा है, whatever we have written and whatever we have written according to our human experiences, if all those things are termed as literature, then this is also true that whatever the early colonists have written, they can also be termed as literature. चाहे उन्होंने होली सरमन्स लिखा हो, चाहे ट्रेवलॉग लिखा हो, चाहे एसेज लिखा हो, चाहे पैम्फलेट्स लिखा हो, everything will be termed as literature. Fine. Now you have to know something about the American spirit. उनकी आत्मा कैसी थी, वो कितने बोल्ड थे लिखने के लिए. So this American spirit, the American people, they are actually made of courage. They are made of industry. They are made of optimism. Means they had courage, they had laborious inclination, and they were very positive. They were very optimistic, and they followed all the hardships of the living conditions, of the sickness, of the attacks of the wild animals, and all types of starvation and every ugly scenery which they could reflect in the pages of the authors are Bradford, Winthrop or Smith. So we will find all these agonies, pains and sufferings in the works of Smith and Bradford, Winthrop. And students, in spite of innumerable dangers the early colonists have faced, in spite of that they flourished, and they flourished, and because we can say 100% that it is a real tribute to their courage, to their tenacity, and therefore their writings can be a very important part, can be a very integral part in the American history. Now, you have also to understand that the colonial period, जब colony कट रही थी, जब colonies बन रही थी, this period actually extends from 1607 to 1765. And during the span of these years, the literary output was very less, was very scanty, बहुत ज़रा सी था. Why? Because first of all, the settlers, the colonizers, the colony people, they had to survive. So first of all, you will survive, and surviving was the first and the most vital problems. And for them to fight against the wilderness, the wilderness, and convert the forest into the cultivable land, and to make oneself safe against the adversities of nature, against the adversities of forces. And some of these forces were very gripping problems, which was actually not well suited for the literary taste and for the literary composition. जब हम endangered होंगे, जब हमारे जान का खतरा होगा, जब हमारे पास खाने को नहीं होगा, जब हमारे ऊपर छत नहीं होगी, जब हमारे पास कुछ नहीं होगा, तो आप कैसे सोच सकते हैं कि हम लिटरेचर जैसी चीज़ को लिख सकते हैं? Why? Because literature is actually related with leisure and time. And if you are hungry, how can that output come? So that the reason is lack of leisure accounts for the lack of literature. So it was by the end of the colonial period that an atmosphere which was very conducive, which was very much applicable for the production of genuine literature, which can be compared with that of the literature of England. जो literature England में था, वो लिटरेचर को तभी हम सोच सकते थे जब हम उस लेवल पे पहुंच जाएं. And the literature written during this period was the literature which was, genuinely of exploration, of adventure. And we got a very popular type of literature in this period, which is known as travel literature, travelogues, which further afterwards in the hands of Mark Twain became actually a very rich source of entertainment and information. बाद में चल करके यही ट्रैवलॉग्स, यही ट्रैवल्स मार्क ट्वेन के द्वारा अपने आप में एक एंटरटेनमेंट और इंफॉर्मेशन का खजाना बन गया. देन sermons were also very popular and very important and almost very much voluminous by the hands of the early colonists, and all types of literature were also produced in this colonial period. But yes, these sermons were written in a very plain style, but they are actually remarkable for the procedure of thought which they are expressing in those sermons, and they are actually excellent representations of the Puritan doctrine. If you know Puritan doctrine, you will understand that yes, they had written remarkable. Then theological writings, polemical writings. Polemical का मतलब होता है students argumentative. Theology related to theological problems, polemical writings. These also claimed a very prominent place in the literary field of America, of American literature. And the greatest among the few theologians were none other but Cotton Mather and Jonathan Edwards. Cotton Mather and Jonathan Edwards were among the great theologians who produced some type of works. Then, to continue with this, students, some other literary forms too developed, came into prominence, and they were autobiographies. Autobiographies, or you can say personal diaries. And these autobiographies and diaries were written by number of colonists who kept their diaries, who wrote autobiographies, and some of the diaries were meant to be passed away to the others for edification. ये इसीलिए लिखते थे कि मेरे जाने के बाद कम से कम वो डायरी आगे तक पहुँचे और लोगों को हमारे उस टेन्योर का पता चले. And because of some religious controversies which was still swaying in the mind of the people, prose got predominance over poetry, though poetry was not by any chance neglected in any time of the world. And the most important poets of the period were N.A. Bradstreet. आप इसको नोट कर सकते हैं स्टूडेंट्स. N.A. Bradstreet, Michael Wigglesworth and Edward Taylor. So these were the initial level of poetry writers who came into existence. But some critics are of the opinion that American poetry before 1765 is actually negligible. It is not of any importance. But there is a book known as the Bay Psalm Book. The Bay Psalm Book, which is composed by Thomas Weld, John Eliot and Richard Mather, was one of the earliest poetic compositions written in America, and certainly the first book to come out of the American press. एक बार ये क्वेश्चन आया था स्टूडेंट्स कि अमेरिकन प्रेस से पहली बुक निकलने वाली कौन सी थी? सो द ऑप्शन था द बेसाम बुक. And this, the Besam book, is written in ballad meter, and the poetic quality of this book is actually not worth much. Now, I will get into some of the minute details of a poet known as N.A. Bradstreet, who was born in 1612 and died in 1673. Now, note it down, students, that N.A. Bradstreet was the first Puritan poet. Puritan थी स्टूडेंट्स ये, who immigrated to America at the age of 18 and had a great knowledge of English poets. बहुत ज़बरदस्त इसको नॉलेज थी इंग्लिश की, इंग्लैंड के पोइट्स की, जैसे सिडनी हो गए, स्पेंसर हो गए. She had a profound knowledge of Sydney and Spencer, but by 1650 she got a name. She won a lot of name and fame as a poetess, and so her brother-in-law arranged for her publication of her name in the pretentious title of The 10th Muse lately sprung up in America. इस pretentious title से उसकी poems को publish करा दिया. And now remember and note it down that this collection consisted of poems like The Four Seasons, The Four Elements, The Four Constitutions and The Four Monarchies. So these four things always remember कि ये किसने लिखा है? N.A. Bradstreet ने. और किस टाइटल में लिखा है वो भी मैंने बता दिया. Fine. Now there is a poem written by the same lady N.A. Bradstreet जिसका नाम है Contemplations. And Contemplations is written in Alexandrine. Because it is written in Alexandrine, it shows that she was very much influenced by Spencer. Why? Because Spencer was in the habit of writing this Alexandrine mode. Now, she also wrote a very tender poem, a very exquisite poem, and the name of this poem is To My Dear and Loving Husband. As the title in itself shows that this is a beautiful poem for her dear and loving husband. A very tender and a very beautiful poem by N.A. Bradstreet. Now we come to the next poet, Michael Wigglesworth. Michael Wigglesworth, born in 1631 and died in 1705. And yes, this person was a minister who studied medicine. He did not study literature, students. He was a medicine student but has written one of the most terrifying poems. And what is the name of this terrifying poem? The Day of Doom. ये भी एक बार एग्जाम में आ चुका है स्टूडेंट्स. The Day of Doom. The third poet which I am going to take is Thomas Godfrey. Thomas Godfrey was a man who got distinction of being an author of the first American play. A first American play written by a native dramatist to be produced on the professional stage. He is Thomas Godfrey, and the name of the play is The Prince of Parthia. The Prince of Parthia, which is written in blank verse. And this play is known for a lot of passion, for a lot of violence on the stage. And yes, he also wrote volumes of poems, 2 volumes of poems. First volume, the name is The Court of Fancy. And the second is Juvenile Poems on various subjects. The next poet which I am going to mention here is Edward Taylor. Edward Taylor, who is also not a literature student or a literature writer or a literature learned man, but he was a physician who did not take himself as a poet and hence requested others to leave his poems unpublished. It was only after his death that people came to know about his works, about his poems, and he is known as Edward Taylor. So these were the details which I have told you for nurturing and to understand the history of American literature.